Welcome to the weekly takeaway. This is the show where I do my very best to give you the information that you need to know from the news. And if you are watching anything other than network television sitcoms or Netflix, you have heard all of the stories that I could talk about today because all of them go back to one topic. It's the topic we are consumed with right now, that of the spread and attempted containment of coronavirus. This is a story I've been trying to get away from every single week for the last several weeks, but you can't get away from it because this is all anyone is talking about, and rightfully so. This is a global pandemic. This is something that is impacting every country around the world, some more so than others. And even now, even as we speak, our country is grappling with the best way to move forward in spite of all that's happening. And it's a story, again, that we're trying to get away from, but I think it's one that it's important also for us to understand. I am not a person who is prone to fear or prone to anxiety necessarily, but man alive, we have these stories dropped on top of us, and there are predictions that millions of folks are going to lose their lives. And then on the other side, there are those who are calling this a hoax, and there's everything in between. And it can get really, really difficult for us to understand what's going on if we're not careful. And for just a couple of minutes today, I hope to give you some perspective and some things to think about, some things to take away as I'm watching all of this unfold. Really, what I'm asking myself is this, and I hope this is what you're asking yourself as well. What are the takeaways? What can we learn from what's happening? I've made this statement a few times over the last couple of weeks. I'm really looking forward to the book that will be written on everything that's unfolded over the last few months. We'll get to the other side of this just as we have other medical issues and health scares and health issues and pandemics and all of the things that we've dealt with as a nation, but as a world. We've gotten past all of those things one after another, and we always have then an opportunity to reflect on how things were handled, the decisions that were made, and sometimes we look back on those things with clear vision that was not so clear in the middle of them. It's easy to criticize after the fact, but we're standing right in the middle of this mess right now, and we need to learn some things. I hope that you will. I've given the advice to several folks. Keep a journal, a journal of the lessons you're learning during this time, and maybe it's lessons at home, maybe it's somewhere else, maybe it's just watching leadership unfold and kind of understanding how leaders deal with crisis moments. Keep a journal, keep track of these things, and you'll learn some important lessons. But there are some things going on right now, and really I want to talk about a few of these. And again, hopefully give you some perspective. This is my perspective, and it's helped me to process through these various things that are coming up. The first one is this, and this is something, again, we have to understand entirely. There are impacts to what we're going through right now that don't fall neatly necessarily into one category or one class. People are speaking of this from one of really two different positions. Either the economic impact of what's happening, and we know because of the quarantining and the stay-at-home orders and these various orders and ordinances that many folks are out of work right now. In fact, the jobless claims went up over 3 million in our country from the last time that was recorded. This number, the report just came out this week. So jobless claims are up, no surprise to anyone. Small businesses are struggling to stay afloat. Some small businesses who are struggling anyhow have had to shutter their doors and don't feel like they'll be able to go back once all of this is over. There is a huge economic impact really across our country, around the world, because of how we're dealing with this crisis. So there's the economic side. But then on the other hand, there is the health side. There is the virus that is in the process of growing and infecting more folks, and we're struggling and grappling with exactly how to contain that. So it's almost as if we've taken the impacts and we've placed them in one of two camps. There's the economic impact, and that's all we should care about. That's what a lot of people are saying right now. And there's the health impact, and that's all we should care about. And if we have to crash our economy to do it, we need to get control of this. And the other one is if people need to die to keep the economy going, then that's what we need to do. Here's a good principle for you. One, I try to teach my kids and hang on to myself. you always have another choice. You always have another option. When people say things like this to you, you only have two choices. You only have two options. You have to do one of these two things. They're not telling you the truth. There is always something else that you can do. Now, whether or not you are able to see that something else or experience that something else, that's a different question. But rarely when you're told that there are only one of two options, are there actually only one of two options. I believe we need to look at this as an all-and kind of situation. We need to understand that there is an economic impact. A stimulus package was just signed by the president today as I'm recording this, $2.2 trillion. $2.2 trillion to address the economic impact of this virus and the efforts to contain this virus. That's huge. I looked at my kids the other day and I said, just so you know, your grandkids will be paying for what we're dealing with right now. And that's a sad but true statement. And I know there are economists and there are politicians who are saying, well, we'll get this back and we'll tax it and we'll see an increase in our revenue as a federal government because of this. We'll recoup all of these costs. Historically, we understand that that's just not going to be the case. $2.2 trillion. People are arguing over whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. Is that socialism at work? Is it a government bailout? Is the government choosing winners and losers? These are arguments that people will be having for many, many, many years, I'm sure. But regardless, the government has recognized that since they made businesses stop operating, they are responsible, the federal government, to compensate workers, to help folks stay afloat and pay their bills and take care of their families. There is a huge economic impact. Now, the sooner we can get back to work, the sooner our economy can get moving again, the less long-term impact will be had economically. We know that as well. But exactly what does this look like in the future? We're not sure. We're just trying to figure out the short term now. A lot of conversations around this. One is, how is this a good thing? When in 2008, during the housing crisis, the bill that was passed, the TARP payments that were made, that was a bad thing. How do we compare the two? I'm not sure, but I'll tell you this. I'm not an economist, but I'll tell you this. These are two very, very different situations. When we look to what happened in 2008, the economic crisis that came about because of bad business practices, large businesses who are acting irresponsibly, dangerously, and sometimes, in some cases, even criminally, that was a very different situation than what we're dealing with right now. In fact, our economy has been the strongest in generations leading up to the crisis that we're facing right now. The high jobless numbers and the reversal of so much of our economic gain is not because of bad decisions by businesses or even by individuals. The fact that many folks have been laid off or furloughed or are not working, that small businesses are struggling, this is of no fault to those businesses. That's a very important distinguishing factor as we look at what's happening right now. Should the federal government invest trillions of dollars into the economy to get things moving again, or to at least maintain some stability as we figure out the rest of this? Again, that's an answer, or that's a question that will be argued and answered at some point in the future. And there's a lot that could be said there. I'm not going to say it. But I will say that if the federal government makes people stop working and therefore causes people to stop earning, then it could be argued that the federal government has a responsibility to make sure that people are able to pay their bills. Again, that's an argument to be made. And as we look at this, as we consider the economic impact, understand it's not an either or, it's not a clear cut, which one should we do? There's not a strong line, there's not a black and white. There's a lot of gray here as we try to navigate this. That's the economic impact. There's another impact though, and it would be described by me this way, the emotional and relational impact. The emotional and relational impact. We understand that across the country, many children are at home right now. And while that sounds like a really good thing for kids that hate school, we cannot forget that for a lot of children in our country, as sad as it is, for a lot of children in our country, home is not the safe place that it should be. In fact, for a lot of kids in our country, home is a dangerous place. They like going to school because school is a place where there is safety, there's structure, they're able to even receive their meals there. And now the fact that they have been pushed out of that safe environment into the unsafe environment of home has caused some real problems. That's a real impact on those children. In fact, those kids are at home now also with parents who currently aren't working. It's creating an environment within homes that is causing what we know to be, not simply anecdotally, but statistically causing a rise in domestic violence cases across the country. We know that to be true. Also, the suicide rates across our country are increasing at an alarming pace. Why? Because folks who crave social interaction, people who should not be isolated from others, are now isolated in their homes with an uncertain future, perhaps not even sure of their own economic security, trying to figure things out, and is pushing people beyond the brink. There is an economic impact to what we're dealing with. There is no question about that. There's also a relational impact to what we're dealing with. And when we try to pave the way forward, I say we very loosely. I have not been asked what I think should be the next step in this. But as our politicians and policy makers pave the way forward, as they put a plan together that carries us out of this crisis, they need to understand not only the economic impact, but the emotional impact. Those who are screaming that we need to stay isolated until the health impact is gone are doing so without regard for the economic impact to our nation and to our communities, to our individual families, and to the emotional and relational impact. I wonder what will be said about those as we look back on this years from now. We know that there is a third impact, and that's the health impact. Again, you watch the news, you hear the numbers. If you watch Fox, you get one set of numbers. If you watch CNN, you get another set of numbers. If you're watching the president's daily press briefings, hopefully you're receiving some numbers there. You have to take all of these things and kind of do the average. That's what I do. It's like, well, they're a little over here, and they're a little over there, and they're kind of out here. Let's take the average and see if we can come to something that resembles the truth. We don't know what those numbers are exactly, but we know that there is a real health impact. This is a virus that spreads very quickly and very easily. It impacts people and infects people very, very quickly and very easily. Even though it impacts them quickly, or infects them quickly rather, it takes a while before we know that, which causes more folks to be infected by that. We know that most people will deal with it and they'll get through it. Some people will not, and people are losing their lives. We know all of these things are happening. So that is a very real impact of the coronavirus issue that we're dealing with right now. This global pandemic. We look at other countries and we see how they've handled it, and we try to model our response after those countries. But again, no two countries are exactly the same. And I would argue that the United States, because of our healthcare system, because of the size of our country geographically and the number of citizens that we have, cannot be compared, again, neatly with any of the other countries that are dealing with this. Each one is doing the best with what they have and doing the best to deal with it in a way that takes care of their citizens. So as we look at all of this, again, trying to parse through the information that's dumped on us and trying to get beyond the fear and the anxiety and all of the rest of it, we need to understand there are three big impacts that must be considered. The economic impact, the emotional and relational impact, and then the health impact of this virus. They must all be considered. You say, well, people staying at home, that's the best thing. Even staying at home, people are dying. They're taking their lives. Relationships are dying as the domestic abuse comes into that. It's not that clean, and we need to be careful to understand. It's not as clear as we would all like for it to be. So what has that led to? Well, it's led to a strongly divided nation. Again, numbers are getting thrown at us so fast right now, we can't even comprehend those. Statistics so fast, we can't even comprehend those. But we look at the numbers of people that are for the handling of this epidemic by the president, and those who like it, those who don't like it, and we get all the numbers that go along with that. We're not sure what those numbers are, but we know that there is a strong division. People who are in favor of the administration's handling of it, and those who have declared that it's a complete mess. And again, a lot of people in between. A strongly divided nation. I do know that as we step back and get some perspective on everything that's been going on around us, we will begin to view the role of governments differently than we did even a couple of weeks ago. The longer this goes before we come to some kind of resolution, our opinion of governments will continue to change. How we view the role of the federal government in the lives of individual citizens, and how we view the role of the state governments in the lives of individual citizens, and even our local governments, how they're handling this. This will change our perspective on the role of government. Do we believe in a strong federal government who is responsible for everything that happens in every place within the borders of this country? If we believe that, that would give us one opinion of how things are being handled and an opinion of how things like this should be handled in the future. If we believe that it is the state governments that should deal with these things, again, that changes our view of the federal government. And if we believe that it's local governments that should be responsible for this, it changes how we vote and who we put in charge of our municipalities, our cities, and our counties. How we view the government is going to change as we consider how these things have been handled. So many of us as American citizens have been willing to give up our security and our rights so that we can feel safe. But we need to understand that there's a high cost that comes with that. How much are we willing to let the government dictate to us what we can and cannot do, where we can and cannot go, how we can and cannot worship? These are very, very important questions. And I hope that on the other side of this crisis, we'll be able to evaluate and come to some very, very important conclusions. There's a lot going on. I believe that the path forward is one, again, as I mentioned earlier, that includes both, not one or the other. I think the idea that we can help those who are the most vulnerable and control their situations to keep them safe is a very, very important step for us to take, while allowing others to get back to work and to do the things they need to do to take care of themselves from a livelihood or economic standpoint, from a relational standpoint, and in all the other areas that we function as human beings in this country. Those who are vulnerable, those who are susceptible can be taken care of, while also allowing those who want to and who can and who should get back to work, get back to school, get back to spending time with one another, and get back to moving our country forward. It's a both, not one or the other. It's not either quarantine or go to work, it's both. And we need to consider the path forward. A lot of information, just threw a bunch of stuff out at you. A couple of takeaways, and here they are. I'll start with this one. 3 takeaways. I have 2 written down, but I'll give you 3. It's a bonus one. You didn't even know you're going to get a bonus. This is your bonus. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. We will get through this. This is a message I'm not hearing much. Ironically, the one who's saying don't be afraid, we'll get through this, is the one who's leading our country. Our president is saying this. The folks that work with him, who are part of this coronavirus task force, are saying it. But again, your opinion on the president determines whether or not you think he's telling you the truth, so you may not be hearing it. Please hear it from me. It's going to be okay. We don't know how all of this is going to shake out. We don't know what it's going to look like, but don't allow the fear that other people are projecting to determine whether or not you're afraid. You know why people are putting out graphs and charts and screaming about 2.5 million people being dead in the streets if we don't get control of this? They're saying it because they're afraid. And they want you to be afraid with them because that gives them comfort. You know why other people are trying to project the fear that if we don't get back to work, that the economy is going to completely crash and that nothing will be left. It'll be a big burning hole in the place that used to be the United States. You know why they're projecting that on you? Because they're afraid. And they want you to be afraid with them. I believe that from a policy and opinion standpoint, we need to support policies in one of those 2 areas. We need to have an opinion on both. But don't let fear guide your decisions. That's your bonus. I didn't plan on bringing that. You're welcome. Here's one though. How we look at the world, how we look at local and federal governments is changing. It's changing. We have a unique opportunity right now, if we'll take advantage of it, to get a clear view on the role of those who are leading us from a political and policy standpoint. As Americans, we're generally pretty lazy in this area. We just go about our lives and do our thing and hope that they're not going to mess it up too bad. Right now, we can see everything on display. What a great opportunity to figure out what we really believe about the role of government. We need to understand, this is your final takeaway, that the world is changing and has changed. And we need to continue to adjust as it does. Live a life that is not so fragile that if something changes like this, you're overwhelmed by anxiety and fear. Live a life that is able to adjust because you've prepared and you've planned, and you can self-govern in a way that keeps you and your family secure while moving forward in a meaningful way. That's a lot of stuff, but I hope that you'll at least step back from the noise and all of the information and be able to cut through it in a way that gives you a clear path forward. Many of our fellow citizens are struggling, and I get it. We need to encourage each other and help each other and get around each other. We need to do that. But we need to do it with clear eyes, an open mind, and a vision for the future. And that, this week, is your takeaway. I hope that you have a great week, and we look forward to talking to you next time.